Today I'm sitting down with Andrew McLean. Specializing in ski mountaineering, Andrew has become one of the greatest steep skiers in history. All of his accomplishments would take much too long to list, but some highlights include holding first ski descents on all 7 continents, designing outdoor gear that we still use today, and literally writing the book on steep skiing in the Wasatch, the shooting gallery. Thanks for coming in today and sitting down with me.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Awesome. I know you were born in Utah, but you moved around a lot as a kid, and I was kind of wondering how you started skiing as you were moving around.
Yeah, I was born here. I'm fifth generation Utahard. I have 2 daughters, so they're sixth. My mom's side of the family started a brewery in 1872, Fisher Beer. So that's why we ended up here. And my mom is really the one that got me into skiing. She was a ski instructor at Alta, and then my dad was a sailor and also an ophthalmologist, and he moved around for training and stuff like that, and eventually ended up in Seattle. Uh, Mostly because he could go sailing there. And then we grew up skiing at Alpental, which is just a teeny little area right outside of Seattle. And my mom continued to teach, and racing was kind of the thing to do back in those days. And so I grew up racing, got a good background in that, and then got into rock climbing later on, and that kind of got me interested in the outdoor industry and designing stuff. So I've always been builder and a designer and kind of tinkering, and I've had shops and stuff like that. So that eventually led to a job at Black Diamond Equipment, which is why I ended up moving back here. And that was, I think, around 1990. And at the time, we lived in Vermont, Connecticut, Florida, Haiti, Seattle. Then I went to school in Rhode Island, then moved to California. And then when Black Diamond was in California, and when they decided to move to Utah, I was like, I don't want to move to Utah. But then when I came out here, I started backcountry skiing. I'd mainly been a resort skier before. And once I got into it and started to travel around, going to Wyoming and some of these other areas, I realized how good it was in Utah and ended up staying. So
Nice. How did that early alpine racing career contribute to your steep skiing and your ski mountaineering later on?
I think Alpental is kind of known for its really steep terrain. It's got a thing called Chair 2, which is all double black diamonds, a lot of cliffs and stuff like that. So I just grew up skiing a lot of steep lines, and it didn't seem steep. It was just, international, shot 6, adrenaline, snake. And then when I came out to Utah and started touring, a lot of it was focused around just kind of mellow powder touring. And I was like, this is okay, but it's kind of boring. And at that point, I met up with Alex Lowe, who was working at Black Diamond. And he's the one that really kind of showed me. He's like, ski touring, you can be nice and mellow, but you don't have to be. You can go out and you can ski the South Face of Superior. You can ski this. You can ski all this stuff. If there's a cliff in the middle of it, you just set up some rappel anchors and rappel over it. And it was just kind of this light bulb went off. It was like, well, that changes. That's a totally different scene. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Nice. I have some Alex Lowe questions for you and a little bit about some of the trips that you guys went on. But one thing I was wondering, so you said there that you didn't really pick up too much touring until you came back here. So I had always wondered if you had done much in like Tuckerman's Ravine at your time in Rhode Island.
No, I did a really early trip to Tuckerman's Ravine with my dad when I was about 6. But up to that point, or after that, it was just all resort skiing, or if you can call Alpental a resort. It's a pretty rugged little area. And I really got into it when I first came to Utah. I had seasons passes. I was at Solitude for a while, Snowbird. And I really got into it just incrementally. At first it's hard to break the addiction to the wire, riding the wire, because backcountry skiing, if you're going to a resort, you're getting, 20, 30 runs a day. It's just totally different equipment. It's much heavier, much faster. It's like a different sport. And then you get into backcountry skiing, and especially when you are first starting, it's super slow. You're only getting 1 or 2 runs. You screw the pooch, and you're skiing breakable crust, and you're just like, oh, this is not that cool. So it took me 2 or 3 years to kind of get into steeper skiing till I kind of figured out my systems a little bit, figured out where to go. And a lot of that involved just following Alex because he was, he knew where to go.
Nice. That's awesome. I really like that term, riding the wire, did you say?
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I've never heard that before. So speaking of the area specifically, I wanted to ask about your skiing of the Great White Icicle, which, for those who don't know, is a 4-pitch ice climb in Little Cottonwood Canyon. Mm-hmm. And I've climbed it, and I couldn't imagine. I've only climbed it actually in low snow years, but even then, I couldn't imagine with tons of snow even skiing that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the only ice climb or readily available ice climbs around. That's kind of a nice big classic. You can go down to Provo, but that one's, right in Little Cottonwood. And so we did it quite a bit. And I remember going out with Alex one morning to climb it, and, you bring all your ice climbing gear, but there was so much snow that it was just almost walking up it. Like there was only a couple of vertical sections, and they were only maybe 30, 40 feet long. And it was like, God, this actually could be skiable. And so it kind of, what I should have done is just turned around the next day and skied it. But it took me a few years to kind of think about it. It's like, oh, yeah, that would be cool. But it never really filled in again. So at one point I was just like, well, screw it. It's just going to be contrived anyway because you have to rappel over it. So I just went out and, skied it. And it was fun. Not in a like pure skiing kind of way, but it was just like a wild location and something new and combining a lot of different techniques, a little bit of ice climbing and rappelling and setting up anchors. And, there were we did it in pretty good conditions. I think I've done it twice now, but it's just cool to be in the middle where you're skiing kind of these ramps and, you're going by ice climbers, and it was fun. It was novel.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, that sounds like a great local fun adventure. Staying on the Great White Icicle and Alex, there's another like mythical story about his car-to-car ascent in like 19 minutes. Do you know anything about that story?
Just that's it. Yeah, he did it in like 19 minutes.
That's amazing to me.
Yeah, it was. Alex was incredibly fast.
Yeah,
and I think he did it just with a single PLA. Which is like a regular mountaineering tool. Maybe he had like a technical tool, but I haven't seen it for a long time that it gets filled in that much. But it used to be when it gets a lot of snow, it fills in, and the ramps, like under the steep parts, start to fill up a lot. Okay. So it just becomes, almost more like jogging up it. And then when you get a lot of traffic on it, because it's right next to the road, and, if it's packed out and all the ice holes are kind of packed out, you can really run up it. And then another part is coming down the gully. And Alex would, just jump on his butt and surf down the whole thing.
Still, 20 minutes is fast.
Yeah.
That's fast. There's a lot of terrain to cover there in 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. And he did it solo, so I don't know if it was ever like official. It wasn't like he was, but people that knew him and climbed with him wouldn't doubt it.
Never doubted it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, yeah, I could see that. He was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not sure where he'd measure it, if that includes car to car or just but in any case, he was, he could do like Mount Superior in, I don't know, an hour and a half or something.
Wow. Yeah. Another Alex story that includes you that I'm really interested in is your guys' ascent of the Bear's Face. Ursus horribilis.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of another, I've climbed the west buttress of that feature.
Oh, cool.
And looking at the face there, it must have been quite the ascent.
Yeah, that was something, because Alex was living right in Bozeman and he knew all about it. And he had left Black Diamond and moved up there. And it was just, we'd done 2 El Cap routes together, maybe 3. And 3. And so when he said, you should come up and do this route, I was like, okay. I had no idea what to expect. And we hiked in. We met up with Tom Youngst, and I think there's another person involved, and we hiked in there, never seen it before, and just started up it. It was great. I think we did 2 nights on it, so it was probably 3 days and 2 nights, and just beautiful line. Alex had scoped it out. It went right up the center of the face. And we did on the trip. We brought in. We had to get water from the Rosebud Creek there, and we brought in. There were these special little iodine BBs,
right?
And we didn't know how to. To save weight, we just threw away the instructions. So it was just this little bag of BBs, and we put them in a gallon. I think we had everything in a gallon. We just put a couple of BBs in each gallon and left them. But it really strong, like it would burn your teeth to drink it.
Right. I know you had wrote at one point that the hardest part was surviving the iodine poisoning, not the climbing, right?
Yeah, it was pretty. Yeah, Alex was afterwards. I called him up because it lasted for a few days, and it was just like, God, I just felt awful. And he's like, oh yeah, I went to my doctor and he said it was iodine poisoning. So it was a really hard route, and then we got iodine poisoning on top of that. So it made it a good adventure.
I don't know if that route's ever seen a second ascent. Do you think it'll ever be
I've sent
repeated?
out a lot of people have sent me questions about it, and I have the topo for it, but I've never heard of anybody repeating it.
Yeah,
and it's hard aid, which is not the rage nowadays.
Yeah, I think you guys 511A4.
Yeah,
if that sounds right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's quite the route.
So it's pretty stout, and it's Alex A4. So
yeah,
it's not he was not afraid of taking big whippers.
Right. So. Yeah, and just looking at that face, we were camped right at the base there by the creek, and looking up at it all day is insane. It's quite the face there, and it seems to be slightly overhung even.
Yeah, right in the middle it's overhung, and it's a beautiful area, and there's some really good skiing right around there as well, on the other side of the creek.
Yeah, you have a first ascent in the area, right?
Yeah, I think so. Unless it's a pretty remote area,
right?
So and looking, all as we were climbing up the Bear's Face, you could look across, and there was a couloir, and at first you could just see the top of it, and as we got higher and higher and higher, you could see the whole thing, and so we just named it Project X because it was like, this is a project we got to come back for, and so I came back with a couple of friends. I think a summer or two later, and we skied that one, but it turns out there's quite a few in there. I mean, that was just one of many, especially that was like in the middle of the summer or, really late spring. But I think if you went in there in the winter, there's probably quite a bit to ski.
Right. Yeah. So stepping into some of your adventures in the greater ranges, I was wondering if you have any stories or any trips from expeditions in Alaska or Antarctica or the Baffin that still really stick with you to this day.
Yeah, I think any trip to Antarctica is still kind of a highlight. Like each time I go there, I keep thinking, how incredible it is. And the first time I went, it was just like, wow, this is amazing. It's probably going to be the last time I'll ever be here, but I've been lucky enough to go back quite a few times, and it's just such an amazing place, and the skiing is so surreal that any trip down there. We did a trip to the interior with Conrad, and that was kind of classic Antarctica. It's minus 40 degrees, clear and sunny, and just nothing out there. We saw one bird. I think we were there for probably 4 weeks or something.
Wow.
And then when you go to the peninsula, it's just the opposite. It's like being in a zoo. You're just seeing, all these penguins. And so that's pretty cool. But as far as just great skiing, I'd say the 2002 trip I did with Brad Barlage to Baffin Island, where we used kites to get around and found a bunch of really incredible couloirs was probably a highlight.
Did you experience much of that famous bad weather that's up there in the Baffin?
I mean, it was really cold and really windy, which was good for kiting.
Right.
But I think Patagonia has much worse weather because it's kind of it gets rainy. It's
Right.
more humid. Baffin, I remember being pretty Arctic. It was just, ripping cold, but we were kind of prepared for it. We had
Right.
heavy down pants and heavy jackets and tents and stuff like that. So it was really cold, but didn't seem too bad, especially once you got into couloirs and started hiking. You stayed pretty warm. But I remember the camping was full on, and polar bears.
How long were you there for?
I think we did 3 weeks up there. It's a really hard to get up there.
Right, takes
You
a
burn
long
up a lot of
time.
time. Basically like 5 days to get there and 5 days to get back. So I think it was maybe a month trip with maybe 20 days of skiing type of thing or something like that.
Nice, that's phenomenal.
Yeah. So,
The other one I wanted to ask you about was your ski descent of Mount Hunter.
yeah.
Just kind of a breakdown of it, if you don't mind. It sounded like quite the story.
Yeah, it was a local guy here, Lauren Glick, who with his friend John Whedon had tried it. I think we did it in 2005 or something, maybe 2003. So he had tried it the year before and hadn't made it, but he kind of got some good information from it. It's what the what the route needed for conditions and where to go and when to go and things like that. So I'd done a bunch of skiing with him here, and he invited me along with another guy, Armand Dubuque, and we landed right below the Talkeetna base, and which is great because you just there's no approach. You basically
Right.
land the plane, you set up your tent right there, and Lauren was just incredibly patient. So we just sat around and waited, and we had, all this heavy, cast iron skillets, and went to Costco and got bags of frozen vegetables and, like 10 pounds of bacon. And so we just, the camping was great. We had a cook tent all set up, and we just waited out a storm. And then we had to make it up through a big ice fall, and we'd allotted like a bunch of time. As like moving through a maze. You can go up one way and then you get totally cliffed out and you have to back up. But we just lucked out and went way up one side, and there was this perfect corridor that went all the way across to the other side. And so we didn't have to do any rope work. We roped up going through it, but we were expecting, to
Major
have crevasses
Right.
and stuff like that. So that went pretty quickly, and we got up, and so where we were down the bottom, you could look up and see the route and the basin, and the avalanche. There's a huge storm for a few days, and the avalanches were going down one side across the basin and triggering slides from the other side coming down.
Wow.
So the whole basin was just crossfired with avalanches, and we were like, oh no, this is not looking good. But, it kind of worked itself out, and we gave it a few days, and then went up and made it into the basin. And at Lauren's idea, we just did it all night naked. So we started at like midnight under a full moon or close to it, and didn't bring any like sleeping bags, no stoves,
Right.
nothing like that. And we ended up climbing up it. The crux of it was this ramen couloir, which was
Right.
kind of right off the bat, and that was like 3,000 feet. And it brought you up, and you had to go through this big like wind pillow. That was one of the scarier parts of the whole thing. And then you got onto the ridge, and the ridge took you all the way up to the summit. But it would be tough to do from the top down because it's just, we were able to follow our boot tracks. So
Right.
from the bottom up, you could look and see where all the features were and which way to wind around them. So on the way down, we could just follow a lot of those tracks.
Right.
But if you were just dropped on the summit, you'd have a hard time finding your way down. So
How was the skiing on the trip?
it was phenomenal.
Was
Yeah.
it really?
Yeah, there was the ramen couloir had slid, which was kind of good because it was just down to like a bed surface, but
Right.
it was carvable. And then once you get up onto the ridge had some beautiful powder on it, and then it had these kind of steps leading up to it, and those were all beautiful powder. And it was a really nice day. So
That's wonderful.
yeah. So,
Was that trip before or after you had skied the Mesnar Cooler on Denali?
that was after. So I think we skied the Mesner in 1995, and that was a total surprise because we just, I was with my friend Mark Holbrook, and all of our backcountry experience was just here in the Wasatch, which tops out at, 11,000 feet. And we went to a slideshow with Conrad Anker, and he was showing, how to climb Denali.
Right.
And we're looking at his photos. It's like, well, that looks totally skiable. So my friend Mark and I were like, yeah, we'll give it a try. We had no idea what we were getting into. We'd never been above like 14,000 feet. And I went up there and just, all these people are like, oh, you newbies, you'll never make it. And we're like, I know, we're just going to check it out.
We're just going to have
Gonna
fun.
check
Yeah.
it out. Yeah, we're just, we'll just check it out. We'll come back. And we just ended up hanging around at the 14.3 camp and acclimatizing by skiing, which is, a good way to go.
Sounds phenomenal.
Because it's fun.
Yeah, fun.
And then one day we ended up, summiting with our skis on and skied down the Mesner. Which was, totally surreal because it's huge. It looks like a splitter couloir, but when you get in there, it's like, a quarter mile wide. So it's not like getting to the head of a couloir and just being like a little pinner. It's just like, I don't know. I don't think we're in the right spot, Mark, because it just looked too. And Mark was, he was like, I'm going down. And so he just starts skiing down. And as you start skiing in and it rolls over, all of a sudden you can see it's a vertical mile. It's like 5,000 feet of just pure couloir with the camp down at the bottom.
That's phenomenal.
It was cool. It was steep at the top. It's like probably 50 degrees, and you can only make like 4 or 5 turns before you're totally gassed.
Yeah, no oxygen.
And it creeps up on you really quickly. It's like, so it's like, you'd make 3 turns, and then you'd have to shut it down and catch your breath. So, we did that one, and then came back and did Hunter. And then while we were on Hunter, I looked across and saw Foraker, and that's when I kind of started to think about the idea of skiing all 3 of them.
And then you completed the third one. How long after Hunter?
It was a few years. I think we tried it with Lauren Glick and Greg Hill and Mike Pennings in 2007, and we didn't even come close to it.
Really?
We were way too early. And then came back, I think, in 2009 and skied the Sultana Ridge.
Nice.
So, it was like 1995 through 2007. That's what it
awesome.
took to ski 3 mountains. Took a while.
Yeah, they're serious mountains, though. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, they were all good.
A little sidestep. I wanted to talk to you a little about your design work. And, I know you've designed things like the Talon for aid climbing, the Whippet for steep skiing, of course, and then like the Wiregate Carabiner and the first Camelot for BD. And I wanted to know, like, if you had a favorite of those designs.
Oh, the Whippet.
Really? For sure?
Well, no, I use the Whippet all the time, so it's a
Right.
kind of a personal favorite. And that was just a pet project. So usually at Black Diamond, designing a carabiner, even though it's such a simple thing, it actually takes like 6 months because you have to keep doing all these iterations
Right.
and just tweaking it just to get the right weight, the right cost, the right manufacturing. So there was a lot of, after you design something, you'd have to wait for a prototype to be built. So in the meantime, I was just kind of doing things like the Pecker was one of those,
Right.
like a little side project, and the Whippet was a little fun side project. But I liked it because, I'm into skiing.
Right.
So they probably, the Wiregate Beaner, I use that all the time, and I see them, they're really, at the time, Black Diamond, they were just so different. They were,
Right.
being called the paperclip carabiner, and the number one selling carabiner at the time was the Oval,
Right.
which, I forget, they sold, tons of them. And so when you get together for the reps meeting, they're showing it, and all the people were climbers, and they were like, yeah, we're really into this, but, we're going to sell 1/20th of the Oval. And it was like, oh, okay, and it just like caught on like right away because people went out and went climbing on it. So there wasn't like a hard sell. It wasn't kind of like, you got to use this because of this, this, and this. people, aid climbers went out and they could, carry a lot more beaners with less weight. The alpine climbers liked it because it didn't jam.
Right, yeah.
It was lighter and, it had a good gait action to it. And all of a sudden it just took off. So that's one of my favorites. I like the cams because it was a big project. I think it took
Right.
about 18 months to design all of those. They just have a lot of different parts to them, different sizes, and testing, and so
That's awesome.
that was a good one.
I was wondering, as a user of these products, do you find that you have an advantage as a designer, like over someone who designs products as an engineer, as a product designer, and doesn't go out and climb?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, maybe not an advantage, but definitely an insight into it. When I go out skiing or climbing, you spend a lot of time, using the product, and I think you pick up insights into what makes a carabiner, good to use or fun to use,
Right.
or what's important in a cam, or what's important in a self-arrest tool, versus if you just sat down and if you were into I don't know, ultimate frisbee or biking or something, you can't really put yourself in the mindset of what does a climber want out of this type of thing.
Right. That
So
makes perfect sense. On the same line, I wanted to ask a little bit about what the culture was like uh, in those days at Black Diamond. There's kind of a lot of stories between a lot of you legendary athletes who were working there at the time, from Alex and yourself and many others, and then just kind of stories about how it was. And I'd like to know like what you thought of the culture at the time.
it was really fun. It was it might have been lore, but there was this idea like Patagonia started because Black Diamond grew out of Patagonia. It used to
Right.
be Chouinard equipment was the original, and then it grew into Patagonia, and then
Black
Chouinard
Diamond.
got
Right.
sick of the climbing and sold it to became Black Diamond. But Patagonia's philosophy was to hire climbers and skiers, and then they'd learn their job. So the foremost thing was you had to know climbing and skiing.
Right.
And at the time, it just happened to coalesce with the boom in climbing. Like climbing was, it was kind of seen as you go out, you go climbing and you fall and split your head open and bleed to death type of thing.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it just started to get a lot more safe, and people just caught on to the mainstream of climbing. So it took off. And so Black Diamond was just growing, exponentially, 20% a year type of thing. And so they just kept hiring, people like Doug Heinrich and Alex Lowe and Johnny Woodward, and, just a huge number of people that were, really avid climbers and skiers. And it was run by Peter Metcalf, who was,
Right.
a really accomplished alpinist. And so the sales meetings were really fun because people would, you'd just be lying on the floor and, people screaming and getting really passionate about their gear. And the sales reps were all really avid users of all the gear. So it wasn't really, marketing wasn't really a major consideration. Like I think nowadays a lot of it's like, we need a women's harness that sells for $39.95 type of
Right.
thing. And that's a whole different thing than, here's like, or like when sport climbing came in, that was like this whole new avenue of,
Right.
what do sport climbers want type of thing. And you start designing for those specific activities rather than for marketing. So it was kind of wide open. There were a lot of projects that were kind of the main bread and butter of it, carabiners, harnesses, backpacks. But then if you came up with other ideas for, whippets or talons,
Right.
peckers, things like that, it was like, oh yeah, they'd throw them in there.
Nice. That's really interesting. So the next thing I'd like to ask you about is the shooting gallery, the book, and the guide, and why you decided to share that.
Let's see. When I first started skiing, as I mentioned, I was mainly interested in like steep skiing, and there was one I really wanted to do was main baldy shoot at Alta,
Right.
and so we did that early on. And then just in talking to other people, we did Main Baldy, and then we did another one, Holy Toledo. And one of the Wasatch locals was like, oh, those are the two big shoots in the Wasatch. You've ticked them both. And it was kind of like, I don't know about that. It just seems like, there's that one, there's Mount Superior, there's this,
Right.
there's all these,
You can look around and see
what
them.
about all these? And because of my background in climbing, I was kind of used to, climbs having rating systems, 512, that type of thing, and then having a description and, the whole methodology of naming routes, which is kind of funny,
Right.
there's just a big history of that. So I started to think, there's a ton of them out there, and all the guidebooks at the time were kind of an outgrowth of like cross country skiing. Like touring was, done on cross country, beefy cross country gear, and it was all like, this is an avalanche path, stay away from it.
Right.
And we were like, oh, that's an avalanche path. We're going to go check it out.
Right.
And the avalanche technology was pretty. It was more like avoidance, like, this is an avalanche path, just stay away from it. Although, people were always getting caught in avalanches as well. So I started to keep track of them and ski a few of them and found, Alex Lowe was really into it. We skied the South Face of Superior and a few of the other big ones together. And then at one point I was talking to one of the UDOT guys, that control the road, and they had this whole book on avalanche paths that they shoot to control
Right.
the road, and it was just like, oh, there it is. This is like, here's
Here's where I'm going to
this is
go.
where I'm going to go. So there were like 36, and they just detailed everything. Their aspect, their collection zone at the top, their vertical, their slope angle, and it was just, just started checking, one of those off, and then there were a whole bunch over the same thing over in Big Cottonwood. So those were a bunch of them, but then that kind of led to, others that were more like, nooks and crannies along the way.
Right.
So,
Things you found when you were heading out to these other shoots,
other ones
basically.
that were, so some of them are, big major shoots, but then there's other ones that are just kind of fun that were in there. So then I started to just make notes of it and, write down some description and angles and, things like that. With the idea that I was just going to print it out like on a copier and fold it in half and staple it. And it would be like this little, thing.
Pamphlet.
Because
Yeah.
it was like, there must be like, I'll give one to you, I'll give one to you guys, and, that'll be it. And then if I run out, I'll just print some more and everyone will get a laugh out of it, type of thing.
Yeah.
And so then, but I worked on it for probably 2 or 3 years. And when I went to do that, like you can't staple
more than
like 5 pages.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's just it splays out. So then I'd put in so much work on it. I went to try to get some publishers like Wolverine Press or Chalkstone at the time, and they were like, no, nobody does that. And, I was like, oh, God, I just put in all this effort because I'd written the whole thing. I didn't realize that's not how you publish a book. Like
you're supposed to go.
You're supposed to go to them first.
Right.
And so they were like, oh, you need to rewrite this whole thing. I was like, oh, I'm not going to rewrite this whole thing because I had it all, PageMaker and had it all set. But Salt Lake has a huge printing industry because of the LDS Church.
Right.
So I just found a publisher down the road and was like, well, I'm just going to totally eat it on this, but, I'll have them printed. And I was like, well, how much for 200? And it was like, it's $20 a book. I was like, oh, that's a lot. And so you end up having to print quite a few.
Right. The
to
more
get the
you
number
print,
down.
you get a lower number
So I was
per
like,
book.
all right, I'll risk like $3,000 on this. But it was like, I'm just, had these visions of just burning them or throwing them away. I was like, but I put too much work into it. So it's like, fine, I'll just do it. And at first, I'd hand a few out and the shops would be like, no, we don't want any of them. And then, I'd get home and on my answering machine, they'd be like, yeah, the shop employees bought 2 of them. So we'll take 2 more.
Right.
So, here's 2 more. And then, here's 2 more. And then it just kind of caught on from there. But yeah, it definitely did not start out as any sort of master plan. It was a lot of like, I'd go skiing, I'd come home, I'd still be jacked up from skiing, have a beer and just like write whatever came to mind. Now I look back on it years later, I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that. But I mean, some of it, a lot of it's serious, but a lot of it is just pretty cavalier.
Well, I think that's kind of what I really enjoy about it. Like for me personally, as someone who's interested in skiing, you can read it not just as a guidebook, but almost for entertainment, for joy.
Okay.
I like that. And I'm also a really big fan of the rating systems in the book because, like skiing has, has our only rating systems are supposedly up to double black diamond, which doesn't mean anything and is different everywhere. So it's neat. And I think it would have been cool if that had caught on more, and maybe it still will, but
I'd like to, I always thought that, the arguments that people have is that it's just so subjective. Like if you ski Mount Superior and totally blower stable powder, it's pretty easy. You could fall and you're just going to stick. But if you do it on rock hard ice,
it's a whole different game.
It's going to be a whole different thing. But it's the same thing with rock climbing. If you go out and you climb something hard in perfect conditions, it's 5'10". But if you go out and it's gushing rain, it's going to be way harder. And so people just didn't think that you could rate ski descents like that. But I think if I was to do it over again, I'd make it open-ended. I like the Australian rock climbing system.
Right.
It's just 1 through 50. If somebody does something harder, it's 51. It's harder is 52. And if they get upgraded or downgraded, that's the way it goes. But so at the time it was kind of tied, 1 through 6, with 6 being like the impossible.
Right.
But, now people do 7s, 8s, 9s.
Right. Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that people criticize the that it's condition based, but I mean, I would argue too, rock climbing's condition based, as you just said, but ice climbing even more so. You can get on an ice climb that's thin and it's way tougher than when it's fat and thick and 30 degrees out and you're getting perfect sticks.
Yeah.
So.
And people didn't they were really offended that their run would be rated. They didn't want, because if you have, like if you ski a beautiful field of powder, you go to Days Fork, what would that be rated? A 2? And they're just like, it's not to say it's bad skiing.
No,
but
it's
they're
great
just kind of
skiing.
like,
Right. That can't be a 2.
It was like, it's my favorite run, it's not even it's a 1, it's a 2. It's like, whatever,
Well, that doesn't make it not your favorite,
it's different. It's like steep skiing.
Right.
Where the intention is to ski steep lines.
Right. Yeah. Not always powder, as as they say. The steeper it is, the less powder's on it.
Yeah. And a lot of times you don't want really deep powder because of avalanche conditions, right?
Of course.
So it's kind of this fine line of picking the right conditions for the line.
Where were you as like the adaptations in avalanche safety equipment came out? Were you an early adopter? Or I know, so the reason I ask is there's a famous story about another friend of yours, Doug Coombs, who when he was skiing at Bridger Bowl would flash his camera to make the beeper go off, and he had a wooden block sewed into his Peeps container. So I was wondering how you were as far as an adapter to those early changes.
I was kind of unquestioning early adapter. I think Doug just had a very strong dirtbag mentality. He could have gotten a beacon, but it was just more fun to go out and kind of get around the system. But it was, beacons when I started were they were analog, so you had to like turn them down,
and the knob on top,
and you had like an earpiece on some of them, so you'd have to plug the ear thing and listen to it and turn it down, and it was much more complicated. But they were just part of your kit. You'd have a shovel and a beacon. Later on the probes kind of became part of the package, but it was always, as far as my skiing was considered, I wouldn't say I was an early adopter, but it was just not a question. It's like, you're going out skiing, you need a backpack, touring skis, a beacon, and a shovel.
How effective in searches were those early analog beacons?
I never had a chance to try them. I think they were. You just had to practice a lot more with them. Nowadays they're really, you turn them on, and I just saw an ad for one. It talks to you, right? It says, run forward, go left, go right, dig here, type of thing. Right,
full Elliott.
So these were like you had to wait till the beep. You had to turn it down. So they required a lot more practice with them.
Right. Another one of your trips that I want to talk about, I have two more, but the Enclosure couloir on the Grand Teton
Yeah.
was something I was interested in. I've seen the couloir. Of course, I've never skied it, but I was just interested in that trip and how it came about that you wanted to ski that line.
It was another Alex outing. Alex had worked as a guide, Exum guide,
Right.
and so he knew about it. And we had done a bunch of steep skiing, that type of stuff, and I'd never seen or even heard of the Enclosure, but Alex had done it and thought it would be a good candidate for skiing. So we went up there and wrapped around and climbed up it and skied down it. But it was really firm conditions. I think we did it in early summer type of thing.
Right.
And so that was one of the first times we did full on rope skiing, and it was kind of it was fun in that we were just figuring it out. Like if you have somebody go up and you're belaying somebody, you can't feed fast enough with a belay device.
Right.
So, we tried that, and, the skier makes a turn and get jerked. And so then we, just figured out that if you go up through a piece and then you do a hip belay, that's plenty to stop a skier. It may not be enough to stop a, vertical fall on rock,
Right.
but for a skier, it's enough to hold them, and the skier, will regain traction if they slip.
Right.
So, that was just kind of fun to go up there and ski something totally wild. Yeah. I don't think that one's been repeated, not because it's a desirable line, just because it's so obscure. And
Yeah. But I mean, it's beautiful. It's cool.
Yeah, it's a cool line.
And then so another similar first descent was the Edmonds Headwall on Rainier.
Yeah, that was a legitimately awesome ski descent. That was Carl Skoog, who's from the Northwest. His brother Lowell, they just knew all about Mount Rainier and what had been skied, what hadn't, what had potential for it. So since I'd lived in Washington, I was kind of inclined to go up and ski there. And we went in with, Doug Ingersoll, Carl Skoog, Armand Dubuque, and myself, and we camped below it and climbed it in one shot and got up and then came back to the top. And I think it's about 5,000 foot head wall that's, consistently 50 degrees,
right.
40 to 50. And it was just pool table smooth, like totally perfect conditions. And we sat around and waited for about an hour until it perfectly corned up. And it was just one of those hero ski descents because, it was really steep, but you were just in total control. You could just make perfect turns all the way down, stop. And Carl was there shooting photos. So, it was just a well-documented ski descent. But we weren't able to, there was another line that was the direct line.
Right.
And so I got Mark Holbrook, and it was all jacked up about it. It's it's incredible, great line, and, we got to go ski it. So the two of us went back there and got to the top and waited, and it never corned up. It was bulletproof, rock hard. I think in 5,000 feet, I think I made one turn. So
a lot of side slipping. Yeah,
we side slipped. And, I remember we were just okay, don't slip above me because, if you fall, you're going to take me out. So we're kind of staggered and nobody was even talking to each other. We were just so scared. And we had, we carried an ice screw on the harness, and you just you'd slip until your leg just started burning, and you pull out the ice screw and set it in and slowly weight it. Slowly load it, and then shake out your leg. So we finally made it all the way down. I was I'm sorry. That was horrible.
So you skied it on the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, to say.
Yeah, it was yeah. And then the line that we were trying to ski eventually got skied, so that was cool to see. But it was it's really intimidating. Starts out and it's steep, and it gets so steep that it rolls over, and you just have to know that it continues. But it gets up to 50 plus degrees in there, and here it's being on top of Empire State Building or whatever. You can't see the bottom, and you're just oh man. So it was a good one.
That's awesome. You've skied the Fearfinger as well, right? How
yeah.
did that first Edmonds Headwall descent on those glorious day compare to that descent you've made of the Fearfinger?
Fearfinger, there's a lot of info on it. Like
Right,
I forget who we talked to, but it had been skied quite a bit. And I think
right.
that's something that I like about first descents is, there's just a lot of voodoo.
The
You don't
adventure
know. Yeah, the
aspect, yeah,
adventure,
the
you don't know.
unknown.
So, the Fearfinger was great because it was good skiing and we knew it had been skied and we knew the line and things like that. But, yeah, they were totally different experiences.
Right.
For, yeah.
Another question I had for you is I know that you've kind of, like you said, with your story about the Enclosure couloir that you were talking, that you have worked a lot of these roped skiing belays and different things like that other people haven't looked at as much. And I basically, along those lines, I kind of wanted to know where you believe you've had the greatest personal impact on steep skiing.
Maybe just being a relentless cheerleader of it.
Right?
It's like I just uh, I just really liked it personally, so I was always like this is a great line or this and that. But as far as which lines I've skied that have maybe been, um, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, maybe the Mowich face was a good one. The ones in Baffin were good. Maybe the Hossack McGowan. That was probably I did that with Hans Sorry. I think that one still is probably one of the more committing lines I've ever done. Yeah.
Could you tell a little more about that for people who don't know?
Yeah, that was a line that was done by Mark Newcomb and Hans Johnstone. And they did it just in immaculate style. They went out and kept an eye on it. It's on the north side of the Grand Teton. And it's one of those lines you look at and it's just like barely conceivable that it's skiable because it's so narrow and so exposed and disconnected. But they went out and they did it in one day, from the valley floor, hiked up and
Right.
climbed down, skied it. And and it was instantly kind of like, this is the steepest thing that's been done in North America.
Right.
And so my friend Hans Sorry was like, we got to go do that like tomorrow. So I was like, okay. So we tried it the first time and there's a bunch of snow and it's in kind of a narrow couloir and we we're going up and you have to use some ice climbing and we're just getting hosed with, drift avalanches and Hans just wanted to keep going and the other three of us were just like no way we're going to get swept off, so we retreated. And then Hans immediately was like, let's go back Wednesday. I was like, all right. So I went back, this time just with Hans.
Right.
And it's just a crazy route because you get into it and there's just no, rolling, no like warm up.
Right.
You're just like, boom, it's just right off the bat. It gets into, 50-degree slopes and you're going up couloirs and then you have to traverse out over a huge cliff and then climb up over a huge cliff and then, work your way around quite a bit. So we made it up and started skiing down. And the first part is, kind of mellow, but then you have to ski this huge face that's just above a massive cliff. And it was really firm snow, and it had these golf ball sized, like little chicken heads all over it. And so there were so many of them that you couldn't really avoid turning around them. It wasn't
Right.
like one, two. It was just they were all over. And like some of them with your skis, they'd knock off and just go flying away. But every once in a while, they'd catch up. Your tip would catch or your tails would catch. So it was just like, this is really exhausting. And then, so we took it easy, skied all the way down, but then you have to do a big rappel
Right.
to get back across into the couloir. And there was just nowhere to set up anchors. So it was really hard. And then later we found out that Hans and Mark had dug a big horseshoe.
Oh,
And
a snowboard.
bollock. Yeah. And they'd wrapped off that, which made great sense. It was like, oh, yeah, that's what we should have done. But we looked around, found some anchors, and we ended up doing the traverse roped and then got into the couloir and were able to go down from there.
What kind of anchor were you able to build?
It was rock, but it was kind of like the couloir is smooth on the sides, and then it has snow down the center. So as you got close to the rock, the snow tapered
Tapers
and
out, right.
disappeared. So, I could be like, I could see if you were, a crack, I
Right.
could see it, but I couldn't
Couldn't
get
get
there.
there.
Yeah. So finally, instead of building like a classic, really good bomber anchor, I think we just wrapped off a single piton or something. And it was kind of like it's not 100% free hanging wrap.
Right.
You're using it just as backup, especially if it's just one piton.
Right.
So, it was it's a full on ski descent. It takes all of your rock climbing and anchor building skills and steep skiing skills, and climbing and avalanche.
What month was this trip?
Must have been spring, I guess.
Spring, and
Yeah, I'm
you
not
the
sure.
first time you went, you hit a storm, and that's why you were getting
just
those.
hit it, yeah.
The spin drift coming off the top.
Yeah, it's north facing,
Right.
so it's you could probably do it pretty late in the ski season.
Right.
Yeah, I forget. We didn't really put much thought into like when the best time was.
Right.
It's just like
It's just
just have to
going.
go tomorrow.
So another thing I wanted to ask, kind of along the lines of a lot of people we've talked about today, is that that you've been friends and partners with some really incredible mountaineers and adventurers and skiers like Alex and Hans and Dave Bridges and Kip Gar and Doug Coombs and people like that. And I was wondering if you could give up and coming mountaineers and up and coming skiers a little insight into kind of why you're here today when some of your contemporaries have passed away in the mountains.
Yeah, it's. I think a lot of it is just, in retrospect, just pure luck.
Really?
I got to give luck a big credit for it. But I've also, I started out. I've always been a builder and designer, and I kind of looked at skiing was just something that I did that I enjoyed, but and so I was kind of a little more tempered, a little more patient about this type of stuff, because it was like, I don't really want to risk it all because
Right.
I've got other things that I enjoy doing with my life, type of thing, and so yeah, I wasn't afraid to kind of be patient, turn around, say no. I think I missed out on a lot of great adventures with Alex just because, I don't know, I was doing something else
Right.
at the time. But yeah, patience is a big deal. The lines will be there tomorrow.
Right.
I see a lot of that. And I guess another thing was just a little bit of ignorance. It was good because there just wasn't much information out there as far as when to go or what to do.
Right.
So the first time we skied the Icicle, it was just a huge deal. We knew about it for a couple of years before we skied it, because it was
Right.
just like the Icicle, it's so big and scary that we just waited until it was perfect and waited until this, and we researched it and looked at it and took photos and thought about it. Now it's just like, it gets skied 20 times a day.
Right.
So I think we approached a lot of stuff just a lot more cautiously, because there just wasn't that much information out there about it.
And do you think that you had a different relationship with risk than some of these other people?
No, not really. I think I always felt that what I was doing wasn't that dangerous, which I know sounds a little weird in retrospect, but I could see, when you have people like Alex Arnold saying, it didn't feel bad at all.
Right.
But, if you're doing it a lot and you're doing it all the time and you're accustomed to it and you're accustomed to the environment, it really doesn't feel like you're fully alert and you're totally wired. And I really like that about the sport, and that you're just so incredibly concentrated on what you're doing, and you're with people that are kind of the same mindset. But I never really felt like I was, cheating death or anything like
Right.
that. So, yeah.
Do you have any other tips that you would suggest for people who want to steep ski in the way that you did?
Something that I always did with, technically, it was just keep every turn under control. That was kind of my, I'd make a turn, and before I started my next turn, I'd kind of, make sure I was balanced. And so it led to slow, methodical skiing. And I think, nowadays it's pretty common to see people just power
Right.
driving. And with really steep skiing, if anything happens, if you get, you hook up or catch an edge or hit an ice patch, if you're skiing at 90% of your ability, you just don't have much in reserve to, hit the brakes or stop. So for really steep skiing, I just am a big fan of keeping it really under control, not succumbing to outside pressure to, shred or drop a line or go super fast just because things happen.
Yeah. Something else I've read in some of your writings is an idea you talk about of making sure that you're on a bit of a mellow slope before you get into some of that steep skiing, and that you can get a few warm-up turns, because after, you've been hiking all day, your legs are tired, you're used to your heel raising up, and now all of a sudden it's locked in.
Yeah, or maybe you got some snow in your binding or something. So, and that's very run dependent. You never know.
Of course,
but,
right.
If you have something where you can make a few turns and, before you get into it, but a lot of stuff like a steep couloir, you're going up, and steep skiing is just the opposite of, free solo rock climbing, because, if you blow your first turn, you're going for the maximum fall. Whereas if you're free soloing, each step gets more committing. First, if you fall in the first 3 feet, you just start over again. But with steep skiing, if you blow your first, second, or third turn, you're going for the big ride.
Whole way, yeah.
So if you have a chance to, make a few warm up turns and really rock your gear and make sure that things are going to hold tight, I like that.
I like the sound of that too. Yeah. It's good. Anything else you'd like to mention, talk about?
Yeah, skiing is, it's been fun. I think it's really cool to see so many people getting into it. For me, when I was, steep skiing or dawn patrolling or ski mountaineering racing, I always just thought, this is awesome. I can't believe more people aren't doing it. And so now, many years later, it's like, oh, cool. I wasn't totally wrong.
I was just way ahead of
you. So I think it's, it's changed. Like a lot of the really easy stuff, easily accessible, the Y couloir and Superior are, really hard to get in untracked perfect conditions. But I think it's cool that, people are getting out and skiing it and kind of having the same thrill and experience that, I was able to have, and that's part of the beauty of skiing is it just resets all the time. So, for somebody that's never skied Superior, if you get the chance to go out and ski it in perfect powder, it's, the same excitement that I had and same excitement that people for years to come will have.
That's
fun.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Yep.